Today, I want to talk about my talk is about the labor aristocracy. So, some call it the labor aristocracy, some call it elite workers. These are workers that they are um, they are not the petty bourgeoisie. They are not the um, but they do work. They are wage earners. However, they earn more than their labor value. So this is a phenomenon here in the first world, but it's nothing. It's not new. Back in Lenin's day, Lenin talked about the labor aristocracy in his day, and we're talking over 100 years ago. Um, and at that time, Lenin referred to the workers, this segment of the working class, as the upper stratum of the working class. And he talked about how these workers, this working class, has developed into a privileged group, and that it was important to dig deeper into the working class and into the deeper stratum, the lower stratum, to find the proletariat, the revolutionary vehicle within the working class. So, here in the first world, we have to understand that even amongst workers, the way imperialism works is when it extracts these super profits from the third world. Oftentimes, what imperialism does is it buys off its own workers, the working class within its false borders. And by buying them off, they basically pay them high wages. They pay them high wages so that they can have high living standards. That's why sometimes we hear of people, working people here, especially in the unions. A lot of the unions, I know people in the unions that are making, 100, thousand a year. They're making, a lot of money, and this is a labor job. This is but the thing is, we're not going to find union workers here in the U.S. Who consider themselves the working class, and yet they would make more money than if we go to the third world, more than these some of these CEOs and stuff, and some of the petty bourgeoisie, in these upper classes, when here in the U.S. they are working labor jobs. So the problem is that here in the first world, we are experiencing some of those some of those we are benefiting in some way. Everybody, although there is a national oppression, just living in the first world where we can turn on electricity when we want, walk into a grocery store and there's fresh fruits and vegetables, all of this type of stuff, going to a pharmacy, getting medications that have been tested on third world peoples, all of this stuff, not to mention pensions and retirement, all this retirement funds and all this stuff that third world peoples don't get. So even, a lot of people point to the working class. Historically, the working class has been the vehicle for revolution. We know that. We've seen this play out around the world. But the problem is that here in the U.S., even amongst the workers, and in particular, the labor aristocracy, or what some call the elite workers. These are workers that, they get paid way more than the value of their labor. So this is a different, this is not the historical working class that we read about in the revolutionary classics, in talking about organizing. So, if 100 years ago, because I've spoken with people who would deny that there exists a labor aristocracy. And what I like to point out is that if there was a labor aristocracy over 100 years ago in Russia, um, and England, um, and we know this by reading Lenin, where he talks about this. He talks about the labor aristocracy developing there. And if this is the case, you know, I would have to say that if it was developing 100 years ago, how can we be in denial that it's not developing or developed here in the year 2020 in the world's imperialist center? Um, you know, and so, absolutely a labor aristocracy has developed here. Um, and the problem with not identifying this and understanding it is you will never find ways to combat it. By being in denial of it, you're not even addressing it. So the first step is in understanding that there is a labor aristocracy here in the U.S. And and even within the oppressed nations people, there are labor aristocracy as well. So I don't want the people to think that I'm just saying that labor aristocracy is all white workers. I'm not saying that. There's plenty of brown and black people, and First Nations and other oppressed nationalities, who are bought off by the money that's ultimately extracted from the third world through super exploitation. So you know and so when we talk about revolution, when organizations, political parties, people talk about revolution, well, the revolutionary vehicle has always been the working class. So if we're talking the working class, um, and people here are organizing and reading these books and classics, etc., and they're talking about, well, we need in order to mobilize for a revolution, we have to mobilize the working class, and this is what they're thinking. But we have to keep in mind that the working class here, within these false U.S. borders, is mostly a bourgeoisified sector, and who are being paid off, bought off by the imperialists through high wages. These wages, ultimately, this money comes from third world exploitation. So they do have a stake in imperialism's continuance. Because if not, they get, this money, all this money they're earning and they're making, it gets cut off. And, as I've told people before, you could say that whatever you want, that people that are making this money and having these crumbs thrown at them from imperialism, that if a revolution kicks off, they'll come and side with their people. But I'd like you all to imagine, no matter where you live, any city, whatever state, there's usually a nicer part of town, nicer part of the city. People, middle class or what have you, and these people, very nice homes, very nice vehicles, and they're just living very well. And I want you to imagine you going to this neighborhood, knocking on the door, and asking, if they're willing to give that up for a revolution, and these huge cars and all of this excess that people get, if they're willing to give that up for a revolution. And I guarantee you that most of the time, if the door don't get slammed in your face, probably going to tell you where to take that, where to go with that. So my point is that, and this is precisely what the state, why the state does this. The state does this in order to keep a sector of its workers, um, fully in allegiance with it, and people are going to be allegiance with an entity that's allowing them to stack this much X amount of dollars. People, a lot of people, that are not conscious are going to, stand by that entity. So this, they do it for, it's not, they do it for a reason, strategic, absolutely. And so we as freedom loving people, have to understand, um especially those who consider themselves revolutionary, have to understand that, if we are going to organize, it has to be in a sector that's receptive, a sector that is, you know a potential revolutionary vehicle. uh at this time, the working class as a whole in these false U.S. borders, um, you know, whether we're talking about, Chicano working class, Black working class, First Nations working class, what have you. For the most part, the working class in these false U.S. borders is not ripe for revolution, and so they are not a possible revolutionary vehicle at this time. It's possible they may be a revolutionary vehicle at a later time, absolutely. And we do need the working class, within each respective nation, to participate, in order for a revolution to be successful. But is the working class, all of the working classes here in these false U.S. borders, are they ready? Are they ripe for organizing today? No. The U.S., those who point to a U.S. working class, quote unquote working class, are they prepared to, mobilize today? Are they a potential revolutionary vehicle today? Absolutely not. So if we're a group, an individual, a group, an organization, a political party, and we're trying to, boldly arouse the masses, should we, spend our time, if we have 3 hours a day, should we spend it on attempting to mobilize the so-called working class in the U.S.? Absolutely not. There's other potential revolutionary elements within society that we can, focus and target on, certain groups. I think that, for the Chicano nation, I would say that the Chicano lumpen, and the Chicano lumpen is the underclass, the street elements, those who are chronically unemployed, those the state labels as quote unquote gang members, people who are, homeless, people, people in the street. Um, this population, is more potential, has more potential at this time in these false U.S. borders, has more potential at this time, as being a revolutionary vehicle. Um, and the Black Panther Party understood this way before anyone else, any of us. They focused in the Black lumpen. That's their main recruit center, is the Black lumpen population, the street population of, Black or new African peoples. These were the peoples they focused on. And I think for the Chicano nation, this is true as well. This is the population that has nothing to lose and everything to gain from a revolution on these shores. This is the population we should be targeting. Prisons are filled with lumpen. That's who goes to prison, is the lumpen population. So for Chicano organizations, groups, people, the Chicano lumpen is the population that we need to target. And the labor aristocracy, they're going to be loyal to the empire for some time. For a group, a political party to spend, the rest of the years of their lives trying to organize the labor aristocracy, they're going to be disappointed time and time again. And so the lumpen is where it's at. Chicano lumpen for the Chicano nation. This is the population we need to target. We need a campaign that, so that the entire Aslan focuses on mobilizing the Chicano lumpen. Labor aristocracy, they're too bougie for us. They ain't gonna, put down their designer, clothes or what have you, and bags and all of this type of stuff. They're not gonna put all that stuff down and step away from it, not for revolution, not for Aslan. And so it's very, very important that we understand labor aristocracy, because in reality, there is no real working class in the U.S. The majority are bought off workers, and the faster that we understand that as a movement in general, the faster we can come to some kind of conclusions on how we're going to move forward, how we're going to target the lumpen, how we're going to find ways to get around the bourgeoisified, so-called quote unquote working class in the United Snakes. So, that's just another, little nugget I wanted to throw out there about the labor aristocracy. We need to stop being in denial. We need to stop fooling ourselves, talking about a so-called quote unquote working class when we're living in the first world, the imperialist power of the world. We can't be talking about the working class. The working class is bought off here in these false U.S. borders. It's a labor aristocracy, and we need to, come to terms with that, find ways to get around it. That's the message for today on Free Aslan. O Mateo.